Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome back if you were here the last time. If you weren't, my name is Mandy Reed. I am the postdoctoral clinician at FIU CAPS, and I'm here with Dr. Dornheim, who is a neuropsychologist on our staff. She works primarily on the BBC campus, and so we are co-facilitating today this workshop. So this is the second session of our 8-session series. If you weren't here the first time, that's totally fine. They're not really built off of each other. They're separate workshops. And this one today, we're really focusing on how do we cope with ADHD. So managing our stress, self-monitoring, and coping in times of stress. And particularly now, in times of coronavirus, and I guess more recently, with the Black Lives Matter movement and feelings of stress that come up in relation to that. So today we're just kind of going to just jump straight into it. And we're first going to define what stress is. And so I think, this is a word that we use often, like, oh, I'm so stressed out, like so much stress. And I think we kind of clump all these different things into that element of stress. And so today what we want to do is kind of parse those things apart and look at the different ways in which stress can manifest in our bodies and how that can be different also from person to person. So when we think about stress, we define that as an autonomic physical reaction to a change. And like I said, that can manifest in ways of physical signs or symptoms, emotional, behavioral, and cognitive responses to stress or manifestations of stress. And we'll really go into what each of those look like. The thing is, stress is a part of life, right? Like each human being goes through periods of time or events that are stressful. It's important to note that what might be stressful or extremely stressful for one person might not be for another. And so those things differ across situations, across people. There are so many different variables that play into our experience of stress, but also our response to it. And so a major difference between people who, can feel overwhelmed by stress, which by the way is everyone at some point can feel overwhelmed by stress, but the difference between living in that state of being overwhelmed and those who, do not have the ability to recognize stress and manage it, we tend to be in that space. So there's a difference between, being in that space and helping yourself regulate out of it versus constantly being in that place. And what we know are, their biological ramifications of being at that high level of stress, which we'll talk more about. And so the hope is that this workshop can highlight the different elements and different ways in which we can intervene or even start noticing when we're stressed out. So let's start with the physical. I think oftentimes, we don't necessarily make the connection between what we're feeling in our body and our mental or emotional state. I think, in talking about it, like in retrospect or outside of the picture, it kind of seems obvious that they might be related, but in the moment, sometimes we don't really tune into that. So physical signs of stress that someone might experience: perspiration, so you feel like you're sweating a lot, maybe an increased heart rate, you're trembling, nervous. Oftentimes we hear this with people who are maybe doing a presentation or, giving a talk: dryness of the throat and mouth, so constantly needing to drink or feeling that dryness, feeling fatigue, just feeling really tired. Frequent urination can be a physical sign of distress. And then we have gastrointestinal difficulties, so like diarrhea, indigestion, vomiting, that anxious feeling in your stomach where you feel like you have butterflies or maybe even knots or stomach aches. That can be a manifestation of stress. Headaches, difficulties sleeping, pain in your neck or lower back. I think for me, that often comes up, right? Like I'm like, why are my shoulders so tight? And yeah, I'm kind of sitting all day, whether at a computer, well now, always at the computer talking, doing therapy or notes or work. But I think it's noticing, sometimes I'm not even fully aware of how stressed I am. And then I'm like, wait, why are my shoulders so tight? And I think like being able to tune into those different things, saying like, wait, maybe I'm actually more stressed out than I'm recognizing or I'm allowing myself to feel right now. So sometimes I think, you know, talking with some people, the physical part of it might be the easier part to identify versus, you know, sometimes it takes us a while to notice if we're emotionally in a different place. And so it's just really paying attention to all these different things and awareness and a heightened awareness to what these things are. Loss of appetite or overeating. And then this last one is really important to pay attention to. If you notice you're getting sick more often than usual, it's thinking about like, yeah, how does my stress level play into this? Because what we know is that when we're stressed, we release a hormone called cortisol. Now, again, stress is a normal part of life, and stress is sometimes needed in order to, you know, activate our best performance. However, when we go in that threshold of cortisol being released for a prolonged period of time, or your cortisol levels being at a high, that has implications for the functioning of your brain, but also reduces your immune system. Your body's working in overdrive at that point, really hard to maintain and function at the same level under these different pressures, but then it's wearing you down in different ways. So it weakens your immune system. And so, yeah, more likely to get sick, more likely to experience, you know, the common cold more often, or like I said, the gastrointestinal manifestation. So it's really paying attention to those things and really being aware of what shifts for you and what changes. So then we look at the emotional signs of stress. We see here moodiness, irritability, hostility, anxiety, you know, those changes in the different ways in which we cope. So for example, if you live with a roommate or you live with your partner or your mom, you realize you're going off on them more, like you just snap. And it's like, wait, why am I so irritable? Why am I, you know, like, have you ever, like, your mom calls you and you're in the middle of doing something and you're yelling at your mom, like, why are you calling me now? Like, and it has nothing to do with your mom, but more so the tolerance that you have kind of got this small because your stress has kind of impacted everything else. So I think if we think of those things, so emotionally, is our capacity for things different? And oftentimes, yeah, the window closes significantly when we're stressed out, and especially when we're stressed out for prolonged periods of time. So these are also things that we can pay attention to. We then have the behavioral signs. Maybe that's speech difficulties. So again, using the example of giving a presentation or a speech, you might notice that you stutter more or your voice might feel more shaky. And again, those are, I guess, situational based circumstances, right? So it's like a short time of high stress that you're presenting. But that could be also over a period of time. So whether that's in meetings or in classes, and noticing that change in your speech difficulties. That's one way to think about it. Sometimes people have, you know, to cope, they might use humor or laugh. So maybe laughing in contexts where maybe it's not an appropriate response, right? So when you're stressed out or something maybe awkward or bad or uncomfortable happens, we can sometimes laugh. And that's some ways that we cope with our stress, which might not align with the situation and then has other implications when that happens. Maybe you feel more emotional. So your pencil fell off the table and you're crying, like, you know, you're crying without reason or reasons that wouldn't normally make you cry or feel emotional. You're having a strong response to them. Grinding your teeth, whether that's, you know, while you're working, or some people often do that in their sleep, which is really difficult because, you know, how do you stop that in your sleep? People often wear like mouth guards and things like that from their dentist, but it's noticing, are you having any teeth pain? Is your jaw? I think I hear this often, you know, we'll talk about this later on, but there are some mindful practices that are called body scans. So I know we're in the behavioral section, but grinding of your teeth, that's directly related with your body, right? So sometimes people clench their jaw when they're stressed out, whether that's if you're working on something, if you're in a high conflict situation. You can notice if you tune into that body scan and that body awareness, we can notice where we hold that tension. And so some people hold it here in their jaw and clenching down. And again, like, other bodily sensations, but like the behavioral signs of grinding is often like an unconscious thing that we do, right? We're not even sometimes conscious of it. And that's kind of a manifestation of stress sometimes. And again, lack of appetite or overeating. Have you ever been in the kitchen and you're like eating a family-sized bag of Lay's and you're like, I'm not even hungry, but you have a big thing coming up and you're stress eating. And so it's really paying attention to behavioral changes as well. And again, I know we're presenting them in these separate ways. It's really to help you parse them apart. But I think rarely do they happen in isolation. I think sometimes some of these things are happening all at the same time. But if we can even tune into one or the other, or even just some of them, we can start noticing when is it our stress is like amping up. And the sooner we can notice that, the sooner we can intervene and help regulate and manage. So that's the point of noticing all these things. I know I keep saying like notice, but that's really the point of it, that we want to be able to get to know our bodies and get to know our response in a way that, yeah, we can know this is coming. It's like a map. We can predict that, yeah, once I feel I'm starting to grind my teeth, something is happening and I'm probably stressed out. I need to take a step back and start utilizing my strategies, which we'll talk about later on. You might notice an increase in use of drugs and alcohol. So what we saw with COVID, people's use of alcohol, drinking, or even marijuana, things like that, increased because it's a high stress time, an adjustment, a transition. And so it's also the isolation component, right? So noticing, again, those different things. Then we look at the cognitive signs of distress. And I think sometimes those get muddled with like the emotional signs, but these are different. So maybe you're having difficulty concentrating on something that wouldn't have been hard for you before, or you would have, been more likely to sustain that attention during that time. Maybe it's second guessing yourself, doubting yourself, having lower self-esteem. Like, I don't think I can do this. This is just feeling too much, too daunting. The fear of failure. Again, to some degree, I think we all have this in any regard, right? If we're doing something that matters to us, but we feel a heightened sense of that, the fear of failure, or even the, loss of the sense of agency that I have the power to make a change with this. So, forgetfulness. You put your work in one spot and then the next day you're like, wait, I know I for sure did this. Where did I put it? You can't remember where you put something, or you knew you had to do something, but now you can't remember what that thing was. So your cognitive space is being taken up by the stress, and you have less flexibility and freedom to kind of retain other things. Worrying about the future, and granted, this is a time where I think that's more prevalent than ever before, right? Like, we don't know how long we're working like this. We don't know how long this is all going on. So there's so many unknowns. So in some elements of what's happening in the world right now, that's normal. That's, our response to the unknown. But also when we find ourselves like preoccupied with that, like ruminating on those thoughts of the future, those are often, signs of distress. We want to figure things out. We want to know what's happening. And at the same time, sometimes that can be really overwhelming and unhelpful. Getting embarrassed easily. And again, like I said, preoccupation with thoughts or tasks. So constantly thinking of coming back to specific thoughts, or constantly thinking about something. So stress and college. What we know about college, that in and of itself is extremely stressful, right? You transition from high school, which has more structures within it. You're likely living at home with your parents or your caregivers. And then you move to college. Even if you're still commuting, you're in a different kind of realm where it's on you to pick your classes. It's on you to plan your schedule, to get assignments in. You're managing your academic worlds, but you're also navigating new social relationships and being a part of clubs and organizations on campus, doing internships, having a job. So, you're navigating all these different things at the same time while still trying to maintain some semblance of yourself and your life. And so it is inherently a stressful time. What we know about ADHD is that, and we talked about this last time, is that, I think sometimes we have this fantasy of, okay, I'm going to start something new and I'm just leaving all of this stuff behind because I'm outgrowing that. Like, that's the high school me. I'm going to college and I'm going to be a new version of myself. I'm going to meet new people and I'll be a different person. And that's great to have new starts. At the same time, what we know is that that's not really realistic. We can't walk away from those things. And it's not to say that we cannot work on them, but, something like ADHD, that is going to, again, manifest itself in some way or shape or form in your life if there's no intervention or no way that you've implemented these coping strategies or understanding of it. And so it's really thinking about, this is a time that we can start working on these things, because these are difficulties that if we don't intervene, they will likely still be there. Other stresses that we can, like I mentioned, work, we're moving away from our families, our pets. Illness, that's something really relevant to COVID, and hopefully none of us experience that, but if it does, or the fear of illness, traveling, moving, and this last one here is a big one: overcommitment. That is this new world of college, or maybe you're in your senior year and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't do so many things I wanted to do. Let me do every single one of those things now. And maybe the senior year is the time to do that if you don't have a heavy course load, but at the same time, it's like navigating different things too, right? Like transitional stresses of thinking about the future and things like that. So in any regard, our stress is heightened in college. So how do we take control of those stresses? So our first recommendation is to prioritize our stress. And sometimes this sounds counterintuitive, because it's like, well, everything is kind of pending at the same time. How am I supposed to prioritize? One thing is not more important than the next. Or, sometimes it's really hard to pinpoint, where do I even start? It feels like all like this bundle of things that are intertwined. And so in terms of prioritization, we think about things in different ways. So we want to think of like the chronological order of, how things fall. Like, what stressor is the most pending? But also, what's the most important? So, for example, if you have a job interview, which is going to determine what you're doing after graduation, that's really important. But if that job interview is 3 months from now, or that seems kind of long, but whatever, we'll go with it, 3 months from now, and you have a portfolio that you need to work on for your class that's going to be ending at the summer A. It's really prioritizing, like, both of those things are really important for your life and your functioning. However, chronologically, that portfolio is going to come first. So it's not to say you're not working on preparing for this interview, but it's planning, how am I going to manage those different stresses? Because we can put them on different levels so that we're not experiencing all of it at the same time. And so that's kind of the goal of prioritizing, that we want to parse them apart. We want to differentiate the different sources of the stress, but also recognizing that maybe they have different timelines, that the stress that we're feeling and the heightened sense, maybe we can find ways to cope with that. So in the longer term, we're not that stressed out in coming to it. The next one is re-examining how much you can handle, right? Like, and I think sometimes that's really hard, especially like, say, as a freshman, you're not really sure, maybe you're not really fully sure of that yet, right? Like, you haven't maybe done these kinds of classes before or had this amount of stuff to navigate on a plate. So maybe it's trial and error, which sounds not fun, but sometimes it is about that, like managing for yourself, like, what's the threshold of when is it too much, and recognizing that. Sometimes we recognize after the fact we're in it and it's already too much. At that point, we can always ask for help. I think sometimes we feel like we have to navigate things alone. We're in college now, we need to do that. And still, at any point in anyone's life, I think we can always ask for help. We always need help at some point. And so asking for help is going to be a big way to help you manage stresses now and throughout your life. Using time management strategies to prioritize and set limits. And I think sometimes socially, like, things fall to the back burner. Like, we're like, oh, well, that can come secondary. But a big part of managing our stress, we know, is that we need to have some form of recreation, some form of relaxation and social interaction. We don't want that to fall on the back burner. We want that to be scheduled into, you know, we want to prioritize that as well. Now, that doesn't mean we want to do 3 days of just like living your life and not doing anything if you have things pending. So it's really being realistic in terms of what's the threshold of how much time is being allocated to social engagement, and knowing for yourself how much of that you need as well. You know, for someone who is maybe more introverted and like they could hang out, you know, a couple times and that feels sufficient, might be different for someone who really thrives on that external energy of an extroversion kind of contact. So it's really thinking for yourself what is ideal. So this next point, there are only 24 hours in a day. Sometimes we have so many things to do that, you know, we try to cram the most things in, and sometimes less is more. Sometimes it's really allowing yourself more space to focus in on one thing at a time to help you be more successful and getting that specific task done. And the last one I think is really important. We can plan all we want, which is great. However, there are going to be things that we don't expect, things we don't plan for, like a pandemic, or like, you know, needing to take your dog to the vet. Like, we don't know when things are going to come up. And it's also being flexible enough to kind of go with those uncontrollable stresses in a way that, you know, sometimes there's things that we have to do. It's not ideal, but we have to do that. Okay. So to stress less, how do we support ourselves? Well, we can think just even from a stance of taking care of ourselves. Again, I think as a college student, another thing that is the first to go out the window is sleep. We're like, well, yeah, I know I'm not sleeping tonight because I need to finish this and I need to do that. But in the day, I have to work and I have to do this and do that. Yeah, it makes sense. At the same time, I think in many ways, that's where scheduling and planning and prioritization comes on the forefront of that. If you think from a biological standpoint, just looking at the brain, a minimum of 7 hours is ideal for our functioning. There are so many research studies that show that when you can reach a level of exhaustion or being tired, that it's almost equivalent to being drunk. And so when we pull the all-nighters and we do these things, yeah, we're going through the motions, but how effective are we being? And so it's really keeping in mind that sleep is an important part of how we take care of our bodies, but also our mind and our overall well-being. Once we're able to manage those things, we're setting ourselves up in a way where we're more able to handle stress. And so a basic need is sleep. That's one way we can intervene. Exercising, movement. What we know about exercising, it increases endorphins, those happy hormones that we feel, and those inherently reduce the production of cortisol, which is our stress hormones, and it's used as a way to regulate that. Eating properly, so not eating as many maybe like processed foods or fast foods or things that just don't make your body feel good. And then sometimes you just need that, right? Like you just need like a fast food because you just want it, but also taking care of your body in a way that what's going to help me be the most effective and also just feel the best. Drinking a lot of water, taking our vitamins, and filling whatever nutritional gaps that we might have. Now this next one is extremely hard. Avoiding excessive caffeine use. I think sometimes that's really hard if you're in that place of being sleep deprived, or sometimes it's just habit. I don't know if you've noticed, but I drink a lot of tea just because I like it. But yeah, sometimes that's not the best for our management and stress. It kind of, sometimes if you drink too much, you feel a little anxious or a little jittery, or, so it's really thinking about the different way, like the simple things that we can do at the very minimum, right, in taking care of ourselves. Nicotine, drug use, avoiding excessive use of that. A glass of wine at the end of the day, or a beer, like, yeah, that's different to the excessive, intake of those substances. Learning to relaxation exercises or meditation. So this was kind of what I was talking about before. Is anyone familiar with any mindful practices or engages in that? I'd love to hear what people find helpful. But I guess I can start talking about it too, that there's so many different ways that we can one, heighten that awareness. So like what I was saying on the front end of the presentation of like the emotional place that we're in, physical symptoms, cognitive, all those things. I think mindfulness is an excellent tool that we can use to help tune into like the here and now. Because I think sometimes it's really hard to say, well, oh, yesterday I kind of felt like I was sweating a lot, but I kind of felt like sometimes it's really hard to do that. So like building skills that we can really tune into the here and now. And mindfulness can look like different things. There's so many apps nowadays that can help you do guided practices. So this person says, in terms of mindfulness, I reflect a lot and process the thoughts and feelings I have, which is awesome, because I think sometimes we're on autopilot, right? Like we just kind of go through the motions. So to be able to slow yourself down and be like, wait, what am I even thinking right now? And oftentimes what we think that impacts how we feel. And really slowing it down so that we can really just notice without having to do anything. We don't have to change it. We just want to notice. And I think that gives us a lot of information in and of itself. I spoke earlier about body scans, which really help you in a physical sense, but it's also a tool that we call a grounding tool. So we're using our body as a way to bring ourselves into the here and now. So we're connecting all those different parts. But sometimes people find it easier than, like, for example, we have mindfulness practices of like visualization or, more abstract thinking. Like think of your thoughts on a cloud as they float away. For someone, they might be like, what in the world? Like, I cannot do that. Versus if you're saying like, pay attention to the weight of your body in the seat right now. Pay attention to the feeling of your feet on the ground. Like fall really heavy into that. Notice if there's any tension anywhere, right? So like if we walk someone through that process, they might more easily you're being fully present when you're doing that, but it feels less abstract. And I think as you go through it, so I always recommend that people can start with that, with a body scan that feels more tangible in a way, and then kind of working through it. But again, there's so many apps and things that you can use. There are also YouTube videos. You can type in visualization, mindfulness, or things like that. So we have another question here that said, or a question that says, does repeating a mantra like Om, regardless of any religion, help with stress? I think that's a great question. So yeah, you can take mindfulness away from religion or spirituality. In that technique that you're talking about, again, is a grounding technique. So but I think mantras could also be like affirmations, right? Like, so saying something to yourself like, I don't know, I'm worthy of love, and that's just an example, but like whatever it is that's meaningful to you, tuning into yourself of what you're feeling, but then using those affirmations in the moment to help reassure whatever feeling that you're having. Yeah, I think a lot of things can be mindfulness that we don't think about. For example, going on a walk, that can be physical exercise, but we can also be mindful in what we're doing. So typically we're just walking and we're listening to music and doing all that. If you walk outside, you can use your five senses. You can look around you, notice the colors of things, see people, see the trees, see whatever, the ants on the ground. Also paying attention to the sound. So you're hearing cars drive by, you're hearing people talking. The sensation, you feel maybe the sun on your body or the heat or the perspiration or whatever it is, like really, really paying attention to things that we don't necessarily think about. The feeling of the shirt on your skin. I don't think about that. So like really just tuning into like those different things. So yeah, I think mindfulness can look like a lot of different things that maybe we don't realize. Yes, it helps to calm down and focus. Exactly. And the cool thing about mindfulness is that we always have that with us. No one has to know we're doing it. And like we said, it's a grounding technique. It's used to help regulate your emotional levels and also your cognitive space. That if you can bring yourself back down into a place of less heightened, whether cognitive stress or emotional elevation, you then are inherently regulating the way that we're responding to something. Another option is reading books or listening to relaxing music. I really like nature sounds. So I love the sound of like rain or the sea or something. So it's really just maybe just trying different things and seeing, what you respond to. Also with mindfulness, I would say give it a couple of tries. But maybe the first time it still might be just figuring out, what this all entails. And it's hard. It's something that you have to continuously work at. Okay, so now it's thinking about how can we intervene with our thoughts. I'm not sure if I said this last time, but something that we know is that if we're having a feeling is something that's really, really hard to change. So if you're feeling anxious or you're feeling overwhelmed or whatever, that's like someone saying to you, oh, don't worry, stop being anxious. What we know is that really does not help. So what we can do is try and intervene from the way that we're thinking about something. Because oftentimes if we can shift our perspective, the feeling then can gradually shift along with it. So if we're thinking about a task we have to do, an assignment, an exam, whatever it is, and you're saying to yourself, I just can't do it. That feeling that goes along with that, is a helpless feeling, helplessness, maybe hopelessness, maybe even frustration. If we can shift that thought to something of more like, I don't know, this is really difficult, but I'm going to work at it until I get to it. It still highlights that this is a lot, but if we can shift the way we're thinking about it, we can slowly start shifting the way that we feel. And so our thoughts are a really good of how we can start helping ourselves navigate what we feel. But then also we want to be more intentional though, like looking at a thought. Like for some people, that might be motivational, like I just can't do it. And then it's like, no, I need to prove myself wrong. But for another person, that can be really demotivating and also inhibit you or cause you to avoid what you're doing, right? So it's thinking about the thought, but also the function of it and what is it causing you to do? So is the thought causing you to avoid something? Is it causing you to feel really badly about yourself? Is it causing you to, engage in a way that doesn't feel true to you? So it's really thinking about the type of thought. And an example of an unhelpful thought would be like, sometimes we catastrophize. We think of the worst possible case situation. And, sometimes people say, well, I just want to be prepared in case it happens. And my question sometimes is, what's the likelihood of that happening though? So it's almost like you're experiencing the thing before it happens, but what's the likelihood? It might not even happen. It might have a 2% chance that that's going to happen, but you're causing yourself to experience it already because you're kind of trying to prepare for it. So it's really catching those things. It's also another example is like predicting the future. Like if I don't do this, this is going to happen. Or if I say this, this is how things are going to happen. And the truth is yeah, it's good to plan and be intentional in what we're doing, but we also don't know what's going to happen in the future. We can do the best, but when we start trying to predict the future or reading people's minds of like, oh, they thought this about me, or if I don't do this, I'm going to be perceived as this, it's really challenging those things and saying, wait, I'm doing this thing again. Is this something that's motivating me, or is it something that's causing me more stress or more pain? And so that's what we mean by saying, why are they unhelpful? What's it causing for you? And then adjusting your perspective based on that. Some ways that we can manage these tasks, so when we are feeling overwhelmed and managing our cognitive stress, is to make a to-do list, right? One, the list helps us to visually see what we need to do. Two, in a cognitive sense, is we take off that cognitive load off our brain. Like, you know, when you're trying to remember something and you keep going over it in your head over and over because you're like, wait, I can't forget this. Like, let me go through the list again. That's taking up a lot of your energy and a lot of your mental space. And so if we can even have a list where we can put that down on the list and we know it's there, we don't have to keep harping on it in our brain because we have it. We don't have to hold it there. And so you free up that cognitive space to do other things and sustain more attention in what you're doing. So I think there are multiple functions to a to-do list to help you stay organized, blah, 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 but also it's helping with that cognitive load as well. And these last two, I think, are the most underrated, that we need to take care of ourselves. You know, like, it's almost like, I think of it like you could say my hand was a sponge. Like if I poured this water all over the table here, if I'm using a sponge this size and I'm trying to wipe it up, the sponge gets full, right? At this point, we're making a mess. It's not really taking up any more water. Sometimes we have to squeeze out the sponge, let it air out a little, and then we come back to it, and we can more effectively do what we're doing. In a lot of ways, that's how we are as human beings, right? Like, when we reach a certain level, there's no amount of us trying to do something that we're going to be our best selves in us doing it. Sometimes you need to step away. Even if you have something to do at midnight tonight, I'm not saying give yourself 6 hours of a break, but take a step away, you know, maybe take 30 minutes to go for a walk outside, 30 minutes to watch a show you wanted to watch, and then come back to it, because we then feel a bit more refreshed and more able to like fully give ourselves to whatever it is we're trying to do. And then this last one, I think I'm biased as a therapist, but I think verbalizing or talking about something out loud is therapeutic in and of itself. Yeah, that doesn't fix a situation. Sometimes I hear like, what does that solve? Like, I just end up feeling like shit if I talk about it. But sometimes that's a release, right? Like, sometimes you need that sense of, I just need to put it out there because I'm holding all of this in my body. And so talking about it with other people, whether it's your friends, your family, people who support you, or CAPS. CAPS is here for that reason as well. And so using those things as ways to take care of yourself. So when we look at college stress and ADHD, all those three different elements and how they merge together. If you've already been diagnosed with ADHD, you've been treated for it, or you receive special accommodations, we recommend that you don't hide or stop treatment once you've started college. Like we mentioned, college increases stress, and with heightened stress, those difficulties get exacerbated, they get worse. So we recommend, continuing, if you were in treatment before, or, reaching out to the DRC or reaching out through CAPS to help you get connected with these resources, to get the accommodations that you need in order to access information in a way that's best for your learning. For someone who thinks they might have ADHD and they've never been tested or anything, but like in hearing these things, they feel true for you. So the symptoms that we talked about last week, or if you weren't there last week, just those difficulties with attention, motivation, organization, things like that. If you're feeling like you're having those difficulties that are impacting your functioning, we recommend that you don't ignore it. I think sometimes people think like, oh, it's nothing, I just need to get through it. But I think it's also like respecting what your body or your mind or your feelings are telling you, that if you're having a difficult time, there's no harm in reaching out just to assess what that might be. And it might not be ADHD, it might be other things, right? Because we know that other things present similarly with those difficulties. We know that anxiety, if someone who's really anxious, they might have those attentional difficulties. Someone who's depressed. So like in the meeting last week, in the workshop last week, someone asked, like, how do you know? Like, how do you know if someone has ADHD? And it's a great question because sometimes you can't tell off the bat. Some of the symptoms look really similar across diagnoses, and it's really being able to assess with different tests. So psychoeducational testing, which is a full battery of tests, different types of tests that assess for different types of functioning. And that is what we do at CAPS. Unfortunately, working remotely, we're not able to do those things because you have to be in person. We would also do ADHD screenings, which are not meant for diagnosis, but more so just looking at symptoms that kind of point in the direction of ADHD, of criteria that might meet that. We do have some screenings on our website, which those are self-reported screenings that you can fill out just to see, if you're endorsing things or highlighting things that might indicate that you have ADHD. That's also a good tool to use. And hopefully, whenever we get back on campus, that's also a resource that you can use at camp. Okay, so when you get tested, what does it do? So, oftentimes people come in and they're like, you know what, I just want medication. Like, I think that's what's going to help me. Well, here's a secret. Medication would help anyone, right? Like a stimulant, something to help us focus, that could help literally anybody. But maybe we don't all need it, right? Like, so in order to get that medication prescribed to you, you need an official diagnosis. And just a caveat, it doesn't mean because you have a diagnosis, you need medication. But I'm just giving you just the backstory. But yeah, so it provides an official diagnosis. For some people who have struggled with these things all their life, this can be really relieving, where it's like, you know what, nothing is wrong with me. I just have this difficulty that I need to work on and figure out. And for some people, that also might change their perception of themselves. So it's sometimes a balance of both things. But sometimes the diagnosis can really highlight things that people might not have known or recognized, or difficulties that were consistent with ADHD. The testing, even if you don't meet diagnostic criteria for ADHD, it's also a great way to see what your personal strengths and weaknesses are in terms of just how you function, right? So just how your brain works, how you understand information, how you take information in. You can figure out what's the best way that you learn, and maybe you have a sense of that. But by doing the testing, you can have an even more like specific and fine-tuned version of understanding that. And then it looks at your areas of weaknesses. What can we do to help you strengthen those things, or help you maybe compensate for those weaknesses? We work closely with the DRC, so appropriate accommodations, whether that's an example of accommodation is getting extra time on tests. So whether that's time and a half or double time, so meaning you get double the time that you typically get. If you're someone who does have ADHD, you might need more time to really focus in on what's happening. Another accommodation might be like differential seating for a test, or private room testing, so that you're not in the classroom if you get really distracted or overwhelmed by other people, things like that. Other resources that we have, of course, are these kinds of workshops. We also have workshops that are more geared toward the emotional component of someone's functioning. We have individual counseling, which helps with strategies on how to cope, but also, again, the emotional component, the self-esteem component, and kind of looking at the function of our behaviors, and sometimes helping us understand why we do things in a certain way that we do them. We have group counseling for people who have difficulties, whether like interpersonally, having a harder time making relationships, or, just that interpersonal connection. And then we also have educational groups that really help provide those skills. So there's so many different ways that you can intervene. And so this is like different ways that CAPS can help support you through this process. but also, you know, there are lots of self-help resources as well that you can, you know, maybe utilize first and see if those things are effective. So we thought this would be helpful to put in, you know, just some skills based on specific to coronavirus and the transitions and changes we've had to make in our life. It feels kind of weird. Like I was walking the other day, and I saw, like, you know, with everything kind of opening up now, I saw people in a restaurant, and I was like, that's so weird. Like they're in the restaurant, and I thought to myself, how weird is that? I think it's weird that people are in restaurants. Like it's crazy how, like, as human beings, we kind of somehow adapt to, you know, things when they change, but still, it's still just a drastic difference to what life looked like before. And while things are kind of having some transition toward that, it's still different. And so, you know, talking to people that you trust, your friends, your family, again, CAPS is a resource that you can always use. But even within your day-to-day life, like talking to people, you know, putting words to what you're experiencing. Feelings of stress, confusion, sadness, anger, those are all normal right now. And those can ebb and flow. We can feel like, you know what, I'm used to this life now. I don't have to drive to work, and I can chill on my couch when I'm done doing whatever. But then on some days, it's like, I'm so sick and tired of this. I need to go back to normal. Like, I think that's really normal as well, to kind of ebb and flow between those different stances. Maintaining a healthy lifestyle, so eating, sleeping, exercising. Thankfully, we have these kinds of resources like Zoom and Skype and FaceTime and all that stuff, to be able to somehow stay connected. You know, obviously different to being in person, but it's still a way to maintain connections. And probably even more so, like, you notice maybe you're Zooming or talking to more people that maybe, you know, you talk to them if you see them, but now it might feel a little different. You know, allowing yourself to go through those emotions, feel those different emotions, and not trying to, this is not really pun intended, but not masking your feelings. You know, allowing yourself to really experience that. Paying attention to the input of information. So, you know, if you're constantly watching the news or checking social media, that might be triggering. It might also, you know, heighten that stress or anxiety about things that we don't have control over. So I think that's a big one as well, like recognizing what we have control over and what we don't. And sometimes it's tuning into the things that we can control right now, because there's a lot that's outside of our control in relation to, you know, coronavirus and health and things like that. And then it's like tuning into yourself, that, you know, I don't think any of us have ever been through this kind of a situation before, but we've all had our struggles and hardships and difficult times of our life that some way we've overcome, we've made it through. And I truly believe that, I think generally as human beings, we have it within us to cope with whatever there is. Sometimes it might feel like you're going to break in half, but you're not. And it's allowing yourself to experience that, but also empowering yourself to know that you've survived everything that life has thrown at you until this point. And it's maybe now is the time to access different ways of coping, or access different parts of yourself that you might not have had to pull on before, but empowering yourself to know that they're there. And I truly believe that, you know, we're resilient and we're able to do that. So it might not feel good, and it might not feel like we're capable of doing it, but we are. We somehow get through things and survive and come out on the other side. So it's not something that's forever. Protecting yourself, health-wise, but also mental health-wise, you know, being supportive to other people, but also taking care of yourself, because we can't really give a lot to people when we're not in a place of being good to ourselves. And then finding moments of gratitude. It's hard when there's so many different painful things happening in the world, but still being able to find gratitude in some way for the things that are going right, or the things that are still serving you. And then maintaining routines as much as possible. And I know that we're a couple months into this now, so maybe you do have your own routines, or maybe, you know, I'd also love to hear feedback if you do have, of what for you has been helpful. So that is, you know, the content of what we had to cover today. I hope, you know, it was helpful to hear, and it might be things that you've already known, but I think sometimes it's also helpful to just revisit, reassess where we're at, and, you know, always trying to grow and learn different things that we can try. You know, I know when I was in grad school, I would sometimes like go to similar workshops like over and over. And it's interesting because each time you go to something, I think whatever feels relevant for you, you're more like tuned into it. So you're like, wait, I didn't realize I did this last time. And I feel so connected to that right now. And so I think even if we know things, I think we can always come back to them, and we can always continue learning from them, because we're never in the same exact place. And so, yeah, I hope this was helpful in some way. If you have any feedback for us as well, very open to it. Any suggestions of what could be more helpful or better, we welcome that as well. If anyone is interested in making an appointment at CAPS, here is the number on the screen. We're working all remotely, and but are still able to, even if it's just for a consult or questions that you might have. Yep. So any questions are welcome now, comments. Oh, hold on. You're welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you so much for, you know, coming and being here to take some of the information in. You're very welcome. Yay, lots of thank yous. So as we go through the different sessions, we focus in on very specific skills and strategies. So today was stress, but our next ones will be more specific to different areas. So we have like organization, memory, study skills, professionalism, things like that. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you all have a good rest of the day, and we'll see you soon.